Alright, so I think I've got things recorded here, or getting ready to record, so we're going to have you find that part in your notes that deal with, it's still under hygiene. It actually says, so we talked about bath water, and we talked about the fact that they don't shower. I just realized they probably can't hear me. I just walked a long ways away from the microphone. Whatever I hear. Oh, I think I'm pretty loud. So we're going to talk about why you see so many portraits back in those time periods of holding little dogs. You'd love to say that, oh, it's because they're such pet lovers. No, it is because the fleas would come off of them and then sit on the dog. Yeah. So it was really, the reason people carried small dogs in those days was because it was to attract the fleas that were actually on themselves. So as long as people would carry the dog, the fleas would jump off the person and then go to the dog. Okay. No, this is, you have to remember, this is the 1500s, so technically there's nobody over here that's European. The Native Americans, because 1492 is when Columbus sailed the ocean blue. So we really hadn't settled over here yet. But this would be Europe, and Europe was considered, you know, what was where it was at. I mean, we didn't know a lot about what was going on in Asia. We didn't have a lot of idea what was going on in Africa. This is where the history came from. So, and because we are an English colony, some of the things that came out of this come over here. Not this stuff, but, well, there's a whole unit on colonial hygiene that we could get to. Alright, so just a real quick recap. So just talk with your neighbors. Should you can move if you need to, Gregory, or Tom if you want to move. Should you write in that space? How would you describe hygiene in that time period? What do you want to write down? We're going to give you about 90 seconds. That's it.
They were wiping with their hands. They were clean rats. The dogs took care of that. And the dog used to take water. And they chop it in. Greasy hair. Greasy hair does come a little bit greasy and muscular.
Hair fell out.
The child has
It's so hard not to judge them. It's like, oh my gosh, people. Alright, so now we're going to go from their personal hygiene to where we're going to talk about their homes. Okay, so first of all, their homes were made with this very, very thick thatch. It was basically straw that was kind of sewn together. And they did not have trusses. Now, this is the daughter of a construction guy. You guys know what a truss is? It's the wood beams that you would attach things to. So they didn't put trusses or beams in. So basically, it was open with straw over to the side. Also, their houses were kind of built into the ground, so you kind of went down 2 steps, you know, because ground is warm. And so you can build your house as much into a hill as possible. It's warm. That's why caves were humans' very first homes. But if you have a bunch of straw up here, that's a really, really enticing place for animals to go. Not raccoons, because there are no raccoons in Europe. That's indigenous to the United States. But rats, birds, cats, and believe it or not, when it would get rainy, then the thatch would get wet, and it would be, so when it rained really hard, you'd have animals come through your roof, and it would be raining cats and dogs. That's where the phrase came from. Can you just imagine you sitting there and eating your soup, and it's like, wow! And the cat just lands there because it fell through the roof. Or rats. Yeah, see, cat would be cuter because I've got like Puss in Boots in my head, but yeah, a rat would probably send me right off the edge. But also, I need you to think about that this is thatch, and if you have animals sitting up there, Well, not only that, but they would poop and it would come through your roof. Yeah. Rachel said the exact same thing. Oh, seasoning, and I'm like, yeah. The thatch kind of looked like this, and sewed together. But because they had animals and poop coming through the roof, that's where we came up with canopy beds, believe it or not. It's because the canopy beds would catch the poop and any animal falling out, because most of us sleep with our mouths open. And if you have, not going to tell you what the statistics are of how many spiders we eat a year because we sleep with our mouths open. Don't Google that then, Gavin. So this thatched roof, caused kind of all kinds of unique situations. We were talking about birds up there, but that doesn't even leave out all the bugs. Because bugs are attracted to that. Okay? So let's go from the roof to the floor. Okay? It probably is not brain surgery for you to know that their floors were not covered. Okay? It was a dirt floor. Only homes that the people had money did they put any kind of covering other than dirt. That's where the saying dirt poor comes from, is because only the poor had dirt as a floor covering. Okay, so if you're dirt poor, that's where that phrase came from. Now, I want you to think about if you had a home in Iowa here, and granted, in England and so on, their temperatures are a little bit warmer in the winter than what we have here because it's coming off the sea, but it's still cold. Imagine a dirt floor, a thatched roof, and how cold that was. Okay? You definitely didn't run around with bare feet. But what they did do is they took straw, not just from the roof, but they scattered straw around on the dirt so that it was almost like a carpet, so that it was a little bit warmer for the bottoms of your feet. Because remember, their shoes were not like our shoes. They weren't rubber-soled shoes. They were leather shoes, which is kind of like wearing ballet slippers. There's no, how do you want to call it? There's no protection between the cold and the floor. It's just like, no insulation. Yeah, so it's kind of like wearing socks. So what they started to do was that they would thresh the floor with stems of the straw and the wheat, and would help insulate the house. Well, as you would walk outside the house, you would kind of kick this stuff outside, and that was expensive. So they started placing a piece of wood across the door frame that we would call a threshold. It would hold the thresh inside the home. We still call that threshold today. And even if you look in my room, we have thresholds all over. Ours is because it's one carpet to the next carpet, but sometimes people put thresholds in when there's not any needed, is because it's so much of a tradition. But it was originally meant so that you wouldn't kick the straw outside, because that was expensive. Okay? So everybody going, didn't know that. All right, one last look. Okay, so talk at your tables. What are you going to write down about what their houses are like? No indoor plumbing. Yes, out of a bucket.
They're poor, and then fresh floors.
All right, the reason I'm having you share it, even though is that it goes into your head. So now we're going to talk about their food habits. So this is before the invention of the stove. The stove is not invented until the 1700s. This is the 1500s. Ben Franklin invented the stove. So everything was over open fire. I don't know how many of you camped a lot. Open fires are really awesome but they're very hard to cook on and to regulate and to, I mean, if you've ever tried to fry an egg with a cast iron, it's hard. It's difficult. So imagine you had a pot over an open flame, and what you would do is what they would do, not us, what they would do is every day they would just add more vegetables to the previous stew, okay? And they would go doing that for several days. Can you imagine what those vegetables tasted like after several days on an open fire? It's smoky. They're probably burnt to the side. Mush, because I don't know about you, but carrots can get really mushy and stuff like that and not taste so good. And I don't know if you remember the nursery rhyme where you would used to go peas porridge hot, peas porridge cold, peas porridge in the pot, 9 days old. Some like it hot, no, some like it cold. Mrs. Helena said that you guys used to do this in kindergarten. So, or you used to jump rope to it. Peas porridge in the pot, 9 days old. That actually is as old as the 1500s. Okay? So that is how old that nursery rhyme is. And that's because they used to put peas in their hot, peas in their cold, and they used to sit in there for 9 days. So it is not any wonder that they died of malnutrition because this was the food that they ate. Okay, especially if you were dirt poor.
Stone soup comes from, is that?
Very well, it could very well likely. You know, like doing anything to add any flavor to a soup. Probably. I'm not going to say for sure because, to be honest, Jack, I'm not sure. Absolutely, but I wouldn't be surprised. All right, here's something that I always found really interesting. When we have homemade bread, we slice it vertically, right? So this is what a slice, this is how we would do a sandwich, correct? In the Elizabethan times, they actually cut it horizontally. So the slices, and I can't find an image like that, I should just take some bread and make my own. But they would cut them this way. Okay? So the servants got the bottom half. Why would the servants get the bottom half? Probably burnt hard because it just came out of the oven that they can't regulate because it's an open fire. The kids, the middle of the bread, went to the children and the women. Now I'm kind of like, I'm okay with that because that's like nice and soft and stuff. The top of it went to the master of the house or the man of the house or their guests because they said that this was always the most flaky and the most tasteful. Okay? Probably because it was the furthest away from the fire. And that is where we get the phrase upper crust. In today's day, if you're part of the upper crust, that means you are the part of the elite. Okay? And that phrase goes all the way back to Elizabethan times. Okay? So servants got the bottom because they got the crusty part. Kids and moms and women got the middle part. And then the upper part. So it's also kind of like where we have this. So this is probably where it was cut. And then they got that part. Okay? All right. So you have to remember that there was no refrigeration back in those days. And so when you got meat, you had to eat it fast. Otherwise you died of food poisoning. Or you had to cure it. So ham and pork and stuff were cured very quick. So what they would do is that if you got pork, you would hang it in your window to tell your neighbors.
Here in George all week.
Okay. You would hang your bacon in the window to show off the idea like, hey, look, I got bacon. And that's where we get the phrase, bringing home the bacon. You bring it home, you hang it in the window, and you hang it there. Now, okay, guys, think about their houses with the thresh roofs. And the seasoning. The flies. You like wave them off and cut your meat off. Okay? So and meat was just so very, very expensive that really the people that did that, these were the people that were in the middle or upper income, and they would show off. So they can't just let it hang there for like 3 weeks, right? So they have to have neighbors over. So they would bring neighbors over because they'd have to eat that meat as quickly as they can, and that's where we get the phrase chewing the fat. Chewing the fat is the idea that when you got that meat, you ate as much as you could, as quickly as you could, but when it got to the point that you knew you needed to eat it faster, then you would invite friends over, and that's where, when you have somebody over to have supper and conversation, you would go, we just sat around chewing the fat all day. And that's where that phrase came from. Okay? So, at your tables, this is where I wanted to, can you identify what these things mean? What do they mean?